Hi everyone, this is Ethan of Special Presentation. Unfortunately, Mike and I haven't been able to get together to record lately, but Mike gave me his blessing to share my new podcast with you. So you're getting a special sneak preview of a brand new podcast that all the fans of Midnight Pals will probably be excited about. So, without further ado...
It's yummy, yummy time! Sweetum's gonna hit and smash! Turn old frog to froggy hash! Sweetum's find that frog and mash! Polly Wally Froggy get mighty mash!
It's Biopsy of an Ogre, the podcast where we dissect the Xanth novels by Piers Anthony, preserve the good parts, and weigh them against the bad ones. Can this fantasy novel be saved? Welcome to the first, in fact, inaugural and experimental episode of Biopsy of an Ogre. I have with me today one of my longtime friends who has been with me for many of my creative projects, so I'm so happy to have them with me today. Steph Cherrywell, say hello.
Oh.
Now, Steph and I were both, hungry readers as children, and we both got into the Xanth series at about the same age, I'd say. Were you between 12, 16?
I think I was younger than that. I'm pretty sure I got into it when I was like, maybe early middle school. Well, maybe that was right. Maybe that was 12.
Yeah, I'd say so. I think the first one I read, I was 10, I think. And
yeah, I feel like I remember it in elementary school, but sometimes my memories don't really line up with reality. So who knows?
Now that seems to be the proper age to get into it, when you can enjoy things just kind of as it comes, and you're still sort of used to just editing out stuff you don't understand as grown-up stuff. I'll understand it later.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that.
There's quite a bit of that in Xanth, and that we're probably going to find as this podcast continues that that's the case for most people. Is that the people who say, "Oh man, I loved Xanth," they go back and like, "Wow, was this in the book I read?"
Yeah, I read somewhere that Xanth is basically the ideal audience is children who read at an adult level.
That's a very good way of putting it.
I know that was true of me, and it's true of most of the people I know who were really into it. And most of the time, when you stop being a kid, it lost a lot of its allure.
Mm-hmm.
In ways that even some other things that I loved as a kid have not. There are things that I can still enjoy. And Xanth didn't really hold up the same.
No, I mean, I still, I wanted to start this podcast because I still like Xanth as a concept, but I really want to, take a critical look at it and see if it still holds up. And if it doesn't hold up, how can we fix it?
Yeah, I think there's some really cool stuff in here. As I was reading, I noticed the idea of talents is really cool.
Oh, yes. That is, I mean... If everyone has one great idea in their life, that was probably Mr. Anthony's. Was that's the concept of everybody having one spell.
And I realized, the first book's concept where there are these magical talents. Some people have great ones. A lot of people have really minor ones, and our protagonist doesn't have any. It's the same setup for My Hero Academia.
Oh, so I hadn't actually watched them. Yeah.
Sort of a perennial concept. Yeah,
it's definitely something. And actually, what was that Disney movie that had the same concept? Sky High.
It's like Encanto that just came on.
Oh, is that what Encanto is about? Oh,
well, it's also about a group of people with magic talents, with the protagonist being one who does not have one.
Oh, I did not know that. I was thinking of Sky High, the one with the superhero school and the kid who attends it who doesn't have any powers from his two parents who are like Superman and Wonder Woman.
Okay, so I guess Xanth isn't as unique as we thought, because we just came up with like 3 other things.
Yeah, 3 other things that are much younger than Xanth, though. So
that's true. Yeah, maybe Xanth was the originator.
Yeah, Xanth is from 1977, same year as Star Wars. Can you believe it?
Yeah, it was a real watershed for.
It was a real watershed for things that you loved as a kid that don't hold up.
Yeah, exactly.
Today, the book that we're looking at is, in fact, the 7th in the series. It's Dragon on a Pedestal. Now, this is not the first book I read, but it's the first one that I selected out of a spinner at my middle school library looking for something to read, and got me addicted to the series all over again.
Yeah, I really like this one because can I tell you my Dragon on a Pedestal sort of backstory?
Yes, please do.
So when I was here's one of the things that makes me think maybe it was elementary school because I had a friend who was we were both really into Xanth. And we would play like Xanth games or like just it was like our made up world kind of thing that we
Oh,
defaulted to a lot of the time. And we would she would be Ivy from this book and I would be Stanley Steamer, the dragon from this book.
oh.
Yeah, and then like when we got into middle school, I think I like really embarrassed her in front of her friends by trying to bring it up because I was one of those kids who did not get the memo that certain things weren't cool anymore.
I was one of those kids too. I understand.
So I mean that kind of fell off the wayside, but it was the one that that probably meant the most to me when I was a child.
Hmm. It is a. How does it? So, was this your first book, or?
I cannot remember what was the first Xanth book I read.
Hmm.
I'm sure this was a fairly early one, though. I'm pretty sure I read them all out of order based on what the library had or what I could find at used bookstores, because that's what you did back then.
And the ones that you read first are almost always your favorites. So, because that's what you compare all the others to.
Yeah, it was either the first or very early.
Yeah. How do you think that this particular book holds up as an introduction to the series?
I think one thing I noticed really strongly when I was reading it is that it definitely refers back to previous books a lot. You're introduced sort of rapid fire to a lot of other characters.
Yes, it's got kind of the Oz problem there, doesn't it?
Yeah, I actually have in my notes that it's very much like Oz, that there's the first chapters are kind of like here is so and so and this is what they did. And here's where we know them from.
Mm-hmm.
I mean it does a fairly good job of telling you the basics about talents, about how the good magician works, about various things.
Irene glanced at her husband and child. Dor had been young and gangling when she arranged to become engaged to him, and still somewhat unprepossessing when he had finally managed to marry her 5 years ago, even though he was a full magician. She remembered their nuptials with a certain fondness. They had been at the zombie graveyard in Castle Rugna. The assumption of the throne of Xanth had abruptly matured Dor, at least in her eyes, and the arrival of their darling child 2 years later had matured him again. Now, at age 29, Dor seemed quite solid and respectable. In a few more years, he might even look kingly. Another thing about this one is that this is one that happens after a fairly significant jump forward in time. You get those occasionally in Xanth. Like there's 12 years between the second and third book, and this one is, well, I don't remember, how old were Dor and Irene when they got married?
God, I don't remember either. I remember this book is 30 years past the first book or thereabouts.
Mm-hmm.
Because the first book is like Bink gets together with Chameleon, and that's where I believe that's where.
And then Dor is born at the end of Dor is
Yeah.
born at the end of the second book. So yeah, it's about 30 years.
Yeah. But I don't remember where. I think Dor and Irene met when they were teenagers, but I don't remember exactly how old they were. Probably like disturbingly young.
Yeah, Dor was 12, and I think Irene was 10 when you see them in Castle Rugna for the first time. And in this one, Dor is 29, but they were still relatively young when they got married in the previous book in Nightmare. And Ivy is 3 years old. So,
Boy,
so they've been married for minimum 3 years.
that was a big surprise to me when I went back to this, that Ivy was 3, because she does not act 3.
Well, I mean, there's a reason she doesn't act 3.
There is like an explanation for that, but I was like 3 because I remembered her being like 8 or so, which I think is probably about when I started to become aware of Xanth, which might be why I sort of thought of that as like a default child age.
Yeah, and because your friend who pretended to be Ivy was about that age.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely a very it's very weird to read some of the things that happen and envision her as being 3.
Yeah.
Just because I work with 3-year-olds and they can't do shit.
Yes, Ivy in this book comes across as, more like a very competent six-year-old, if anything.
Yeah.
Now, so here's the deal. In the previous book, the future king of Xanth, Dor, who is, I believe he is now officially king in this one.
Yeah, Dor. Yeah, they refer back to, I don't remember which one it was. I think it was Nightmare, where
Nightmare was the previous book, yeah, where they talk about the last wave.
Yeah, and they had a rapid succession of kings where they basically like put everybody they could get into the king role because they were going down so fast.
Yeah, and eventually a horse became king, and that's a whole story unto itself.
The talent of a magician was always impressive once the full extent of it was known. Too bad there were so few of that caliber. Her daughter's talent had not yet been classified by the elders, but Irene had the depressing feeling that it was not magician level. Ivy's presence tended to enhance the qualities of others. That was nice for the others, but what did it do for Ivy herself? Now, if Ivy could enhance her own abilities, what a creature she might become! But that was a foolish daydream. Daydream? "Hello, Embry," Irene said, and fancied she saw the flick of the daymare's tail as a return greeting. Irene had come to know Mare Imbrium as a nightmare, but now Embry had become the bearer of the dreams of the day, which were much more pleasant. The mare was invisible. Most people never knew when she was present. It didn't occur to them that dreams of any kind had to be formulated somewhere and brought by someone. Dream duty was an often thankless task.
So I have one of my first notes is about Humphrey, the good magician.
Yes, I think Humphrey's a staple of all these books.
Yeah, he's basically in all of them. And I think Piers Anthony kind of likes this idea of a thing that you can come back to every time, but it's fresh every time because there are just sort of modular components to it.
Yeah.
Have you read the Proton and Phase books?
I read the first Phase book. That was Split Infinity, right?
Yeah. So he has basically in every book they do the game, which is a really cool idea, where you have this science fiction in the science fiction world of these two worlds. There's this complex where you go and you play essentially a kind of grid game where you pick either rows or columns and somebody else picks the opposite, and you try to land on a specific game, and then whatever game you end up picking with that, you have to compete in. So there's kind of a meta game of getting a game that you're good at.
Yeah, that's interesting. The Phase, the game thing in Phase really does feel like, like rich people using poor people as their own living video game. And it was probably the inspiration for it was like, when you have giant chessboards with people playing pawns and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things involved in the games that are like probably wouldn't really fly in anything less than a really deeply messed up society. But I just thought the idea of, okay, there's this huge game that can be anything, and the people who are champions at it have to basically be a little bit competent at everything so that they can kind of get dropped into, a chess game or a football game or a violin contest, and they'll be able to compete at all of them. So it was a really neat idea, and I think you see some of that same concept of a very repeatable plot point here in with the good magician Humphrey, because you have So you've got some natural sort of puzzle conflict. Somebody's going to come up to the castle. They have a problem. They have to go through 3 different challenges, which you eat up a lot of time as you describe them. And then when they get in, they get a cryptic answer and have to serve the good magician. And those are all really good plot hooks.
Yep. And of course, one thing that he usually has to get around is the fact that the good magician demands a year's service, but he usually finds a way to waive it for a given character.
Yeah. Or it's like he can send you on a quest, and that can be the book.
Yep.
I think that's happened at least a few times.
And frequently, the things that the main character has learned in the process of doing Humphrey's 3 challenges are going to come up later in the story.
Yeah, we have an interesting. What were the 3 challenges in this one? I believe they were. I didn't write them down, but the first one was that there was a illusionary castle.
Yeah, a castle that kept moving to go in front of your vision. So Irene.
We didn't talk about the protagonist.
No, we didn't. We didn't even talk about the challenge here. So let's rewind, flip back to the story. Okay. If you were going to introduce somebody to this one who is already kind of aware of the Xanth series, how would you say it? How would you call it? The one where blank?
It's the one where Ivy gets separated from her parents and goes off and has adventures with a dragon and some other people, and her mom chases her for the entire book, trying to catch up and kind of running into the same things a little bit after her.
Yeah, it's I guess it's I wouldn't call it a wild goose chase. What is the word? It's almost kind of a caper, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of the kids kind of stumble into and out of scrapes, and it's very noticeable that here's another Oz parallel. There's you have royalty, but there isn't really a lot of infrastructure that you would expect to be underneath the royalty. I think it's very noticeable in this that the princess gets lost and the queen is just looking for her on her own. There's no like guard that gets called out or anything like that.
I think that's kind of the issue with having your most powerful magicians also be your leaders, is that, no one is more competent to do a given thing than the king. So
it's very video gamey though. It feels like or like an anime where the boss is just the person who is the strongest.
Yeah, very much so. There's a little bit of might makes right going into Xanth, and I don't think anyone, even people who would defend these books to the death would probably not say that we should be building our political system around it.
Probably not, although it's hard to
know with some people.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd say. Well, I can't remember how the rulership of Xanth usually works, because most of it, at least the ones in the books that I'm familiar with, it's just kind of this one family that all happens to have really strong talents.
Yeah, the deal with Xanth is that whoever has the strongest magic in the kingdom is the king until death. And in the first book, we see that this happened with a king that they call the Storm King because he can create huge thunderstorms. But by the time you actually meet him in the book, he's so old and senile he can barely summon a wind.
I feel like that's a good setup for a fart joke.
But in the second book, they never actually say it, but they touch on it in this particular book that because of what Bink did, now all of his descendants are going to be magician class talents like himself.
Yeah, it was the whole scene with the demon was really cool in that book.
Yeah, the demon Xanth is one of the most interesting ideas in Xanth, I would say. The whole concept that this country basically grew up as, they're basically the worms in this guy's coffin while he sits and thinks for 1,000 years.
Yeah, the whole thing with that and the prisoner's dilemma. I think that was my introduction to the prisoner's dilemma.
Yeah, that came up a bit in the 9th book too, in Golem and the Gears.
Oh, am I getting them mixed up?
You might be, yeah, because they meet the demon in that one too.
Oh, maybe I'm thinking of that one.
Mm-hmm. But
So let's see. So we've got Irene, whose power is that she can grow plants.
yeah, she can grow any plant fast, big, and healthy, as she says in the third
Yeah.
book. She
Yeah.
carries around a huge satchel of seeds that she's got alphabetized for any occasion, and we're told that as a girl she was considered to be like sub sorceress quality, but during her pregnancy her power got much stronger, and things that took minutes to grow now take seconds.
So that's, and then we find out later that is because of Ivy's talent, and Ivy
Yes.
can kind of enhance anyone that she's around. Or it's not even necessarily enhancement, because it's just sort of whatever she thinks of
Whatever
them.
she
they
thinks about you
become-
becomes more so. Yeah.
Yeah.
In a later book, we see her doing this with, like, she has to get past a sticky bush, so she just stands there and thinks about how pretty and soft the leaves look and how nice it would be to touch them. And once she's able to brush past it, she starts thinking about how hard and nasty and needly they are, and how anything that would come after her had better watch out for this bush.
Yeah, because let's see. So
She is really OP as far as magician class talents go. I think that's much more powerful than her father.
One of those things where it's just kind of almost anything, really.
Yeah. It's it's astonishingly powerful, and there's a lot of uses for it, and you see that, and that comes up a lot in this one. Oh, and Dor. We didn't mention that Dor's talent is to talk to the inanimate.
Yeah,
As a kid, I thought he like spoke the language of the inanimate, but no, he just makes them talk, and anyone can talk to them.
Yeah, so both Dor and Irene have kind of an interesting limit on their talent, in that Dor can't he can't control things Beauty and the Beast style. He can't send the furniture after you.
No.
And Irene can make things grow really fast, but she doesn't control it. She's not like Poison Ivy.
No. It can turn on her in multiple ways.
Yeah, she's closest to Usopp from One Piece later in the series, where he just has a bunch of seeds and other natural things that he knows how to use in conjunction with his slingshot.
Dor's talent is mostly used for information gathering, but we've seen him use it for some interesting things. In Nightmare, earlier, we saw him, in the previous book, when he was king for the first time, we saw him fighting a battle by making all the combatants' weapons yell at them.
Yeah, it's an interesting. So, we don't really see him a lot in this book.
No, this is not his story. This is an Ivy and Irene story for the most part.
Yeah, and so is he able to choose what talks, or does things just start talking around him?
Usually they don't speak until they're spoken to, but I think in later books it says that there's like a board under the throne that talks constantly because it keeps getting his orders to talk for things to talk.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
And yeah, so there's our royal family, and then we have, and when the story starts, they're on their way for a sort of magicians meeting with the other two major magicians in Xanth. Number one of them is Jonathan the Zombie Master, who was a major focus in the third book. As you can probably guess, he can raise zombies.
He can raise zombies. So we actually get some scenes in this book where we have plants working together with zombies, which is a nice change from today's, all the division we see today.
Zombies in Xanth are kind of in a perpetual state of decay, but almost never run out of stuff to lose, which is interesting. And
they're also very, very benevolent.
Yes, the zombies, despite the fact that everyone thinks they're gross, Ivy says that they know all kinds of fun games like hide in the grave and yuck in the box.
Yeah, I kind of wonder what that is.
But there is a very important zombie in this story, and I think that is one of the best parts. Is that there's if you look at it from a kind of like Paper Mario perspective, like how each game focuses on Mario and his friends, but then there's somebody else who has a major character development. The zombie story is kind of the B story here, and I think it's what makes this book the most memorable for me.
Yeah, it was it was a really nice story. That was one of the things that I liked about it.
If it weren't for the zombie, Irene herself would have been crunched by the jaws of the monster. The creature had acted with courage and dispatch when all other hope was gone, and had paid the terrible price. She knelt to inspect the zombie. It was in a sad state, but all zombies are in a sad state. They were the walking undead, perpetually decaying without ever quite collapsing. Usually it took complete dismemberment to put a zombie all the way out of commission. If this one were typical, it might survive. "Are you?" she asked, balking at the words alive or dead. Zombies, as Grundy had clarified, weren't exactly either. The thing replied faintly. "It's still functional," Kem said, surprised.
She says it hurts.
Grundy translated for the zombie. "Of course it hurts," Irene snapped. Her diffidence vanished, and she grabbed a spare towel and used it to mop up the pus and saliva and juice that covered the body. "She's just been crunched by..." Irene paused. "She?"
Sure, she's your kind.
the golem said.
Didn't you know?
"No, I didn't realize," Irene said, taken aback. "She's so, far gone it wasn't obvious." But now as she wiped the torso, she saw that it was true. There were what had once been female attributes there.
All right. And there's good magician Humphrey, who is just over 100 years old and stays that way via drinks from the Fountain of Youth. And we learn in a later book that he wasn't born a magician. He went to college to be declared one, which is pretty funny.
That's another very Oz thing.
Yeah. He didn't seem to
right
have any kind of talent.
That's right up there with the Wogglebug, just like stepping off the thing and becoming magnified.
And he's married to the Gorgon. Apparently that's her name. She has a definitive article in her name, like the cheat.
Yeah, the Gorgon, who is like she's essentially like Medusa.
Yeah. She's like Medusa, and she has a sister who's the Siren, and we see her in like the next two books back. I think she's an Ogre.
Yeah, another thing I picked up on this that I had kind of forgotten was there's a lot of sort of Greek mythology, more than I expected.
Yeah, isn't that weird with this kind of faux Florida, but there's a lot of Greek mythology stuff going on.
Yeah, besides we have the Gorgon, we have Cyclops, we have the Maenads, and the mountain
Mount Parnassus and the Python, and the Nine Muses. It's like if they, it is. This has more Greek mythology than Narnia.
Yeah, it's definitely it's. I mean, it's really sort of a kitchen sink feel, but I noticed a lot of that.
Yeah. And then we have the character that is, one of the things that I think you really kind of have to bite your tongue about to read this book again, and it's Humphrey and the Gorgon have had a son, and his name is Hugo. And Hugo, we are told, is, well, they use the R word on him.
Yeah, that really jumps out on future reading now. I mean, they're using it in kind of like the medical sense, which is just a way we don't use it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, this book is from 1983, but I didn't think we were using it even then.
Well, I was too young to really know, I guess. But yeah, it does jump out at you as having aged really badly.
Mm-hmm. And Hugo himself is, we're told that he's kind of awkward and that he has a singularly unimpressive talent, which is to conjure fruit. And most of the time it's rotten fruit.
Yeah.
Now, the thing about it is that when I was reading this, I was struck by how rudely the adults talked about him while he was in the room.
Yeah, it's very It's like, oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry your son is such a dud.
Really,
Yeah.
yeah, it really sucks.
Sorry he doesn't have such a like. Yeah, sorry he's dumb and he can't do anything. Yeah, it was. There's a very aristocratic feel to Xanth that you kind of gets glossed over because you're only talking about the sort of the upper echelon. You really
Yeah,
never see the like the people in the villages very much.
not
They
yeah,
aren't
not
really.
until they get bumped up to royal status.
How
What's
often do you even have a town in Xanth or any kind
what?
of
Let's see. There's the North Village. That's where Bink lived, and there's the West Stockade, but you only ever hear about that like once. I don't know. Yeah, most of the time people just kind of build a house out in the wilderness and live there. There isn't a lot of community if you're a human. If you're a creature of some kind, like a harpy or a goblin, then you live in a big community with all the rest.
Yeah, they all have their own little areas.
And then there's the curse fiends. I never quite understood what was going on with them.
But yeah, wasn't there the wait? Are you talking about the Furies?
No, we don't actually hear about them in this book at all, but there is this group of people in Xanth who all have the same talent and they all have to do it at the same time. And because they all had to stay together, they decided to basically form a theater group and have people come and visit them. And what they can do is they can all throw a big curse at once.
Huh, I don't remember that at all. Which book was that? Do you remember?
I think it was the second one. I think it was in The Source of Magic.
Okay.
That's the one where we meet the ogre Crunch, and he was the one who managed to avoid one of their curses by swearing that he would never eat meat again.
Is so he's the father of Smash, right?
Yes, he is. Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of characters where there's the character and then they just have a like kind of a replacement in the next generation.
Yeah, I noticed that. That's really weird.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at in preparing for this, I looked ahead at some of the many Xanth books that have been coming out once a year for my entire life.
Sometimes twice a year. There have been more of them than we've had live. Here's
there have been. They've just kept coming out like just exactly like Stephen King, except with much fewer people paying attention. And the ones that are on now have like somebody's centaur that's probably descended from one of these centaurs, but I don't know. But
generations come at you fast in Xanth.
Probably the great grandchildren.
Yeah, I remember reading in like the 15th or 16th book that some of the main characters from A Spell for Cabelion were like 115 and 120, and that was like the 15th book, and we're up to 45 now. So Xanth must feel like the future by now.
Yeah, I'm wondering if did they become liches or something, or
well, in the story they were going to a fading out party because they were like, "Yay, in Xanth, main characters don't die; they just fade away. So we're gonna have a party to fade away."
That's like Gasoline Alley.
But instead, they all got young again and went on new adventures. So,
oh, that's nice.
Yeah. So there was another story about King Trent and one with Iris and that kind of thing. And even in this book, we're told that Crombie, who was one of the major characters in the first two books, was so old and feeble that his talent for locating things wasn't good anymore.
So your talent, even if it has nothing to do with being physically strong, will still sort of fade away with age. That's kind of sad.
Yeah, it suggests that that magic is, a byproduct of the body. Is like, you need more white blood cells, you need more magic cells.
Yeah. So okay, so I'm trying to remember where in the story. So Irene gets to the palace and Humphrey has been turned into a baby.
Humphrey has been turned into a baby because he got attacked by the Gap Dragon while he was collecting Fountain of Youth elixir. The Gap Dragon is a huge dragon that sort of resembles a locomotive. It has 6 legs and it crawls along the ground. We're told it goes womp 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 womp. And it produces steam instead of fire.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool when I was a kid because it was such a unique thing for a dragon to do.
Yeah, the Gap Dragon is one of the most original ideas in Xanth, and I'm glad it got a whole book to shine. But it's called the Gap Dragon because there is a huge fault that divides Xanth called the Gap, and people forget about it because there was a huge forget spell placed on it, so people don't remember that there's this big gap or that there's a dragon in it. But something happened in a previous book, something called the Time of No Magic, when Xanth had no magic at all briefly, that caused the spell to start breaking up. And now people all over Xanth are getting amnesia because sort of eddies or whirls of the forget spell are flying off and just hitting people. And that's what they've come to discuss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm trying to remember the sequence of events. So the good magician's a baby. Irene still has to get through the challenges because the Gorgon does not know how to turn them off.
Yeah,
which is very interesting because it's sort of implied that they kind of set themselves automatically, like they don't have to run around setting up all these very specific to each person challenges. They're very bespoke. You always get unique ones, but they seem to kind of happen on their own.
Mm-hmm. It's almost always, the challenges are almost always put on by something that has come in search of an answer for itself.
Yeah, they're always previous people doing their services.
And often you get whoever our main character is ends up asking, so what question did you have for Humphrey that he's making you work for a year for? And sometimes it's something as simple as, I wanted to know how he makes cheese curds. But frequently it's something that ends up, again, tying into the story.
Because I wonder if there's anybody who just can't get a job, and so they go and do this for like an internship or like a year abroad.
Well, you could say that was what Gray was doing.
Oh yeah, wasn't he? He was the guy much later, right? He's the
much later in this. Mm-hmm. I think that's my second favorite book.
Yeah, well, that was interesting because we saw Xanth through the eyes of an outsider, which is almost never the case.
Yeah, it's not like the Land of Oz where you constantly have new people discovering Oz and getting reintroduced to the cast over and over again. Most Xanth stories take place, kind of capsulized. This one especially has surprisingly little ground covered, I think.
Yeah, they just kind of go from place to place. In this, they go from the Magician's Castle to near the Gap, which is pretty close, I think. Yeah, they just kind of wander through the wilderness a little bit. No, they go to Mount Parnassus too. I'm not sure where all these places relate to each other.
Yeah, I didn't go to the trouble to try and draw a map of where they went.
Yeah,
but
anyway, so there is some general chaos that involves the dragon attacking and the zombie that is protecting Ivy hits one of the forget whirls and forgets what it's doing and kind of just drops her and she wanders off.
Yeah. Ivy, and then we start following Ivy as she meets a friendly creature that can talk to her. A yak, of course. And now we have one of those chapters that's just pun after pun after pun.
They walked back the way Ivy had come. "What's that?" she asked, pointing to the metallic plant with the pickle smell that had refused to identify itself before.
"Why, that's an armadillo," the yak said. "It grows the best armor, but it stinks of the brine used to store it. Some creatures like the odor, though."
Ivy wrinkled her cute little nose.
"Ah, they must be dillies." "They are indeed. They get pickled every night."
They moved on to a plant whose huge limbs terminated in delicate human hands, each finger manicured and with bright polish on the nail. "What's that?"
A ladyfinger's plant, naturally, the yak said. You have hands. You can shake hands in the typical human fashion if you wish.
Ivy tried it, extending her right hand toward the nearest branch. She could tell her right hand from her left because her hands lined up the same way her feet did, and her shoes were marked R and L. The nearest ladyfingers grasped her hand immediately, but then all the other hands clamored for attention by snapping their fingers, and she had to shake them all. And it's not that it gets necessarily old, because I do love puns, but it would be nice if there was a little bit of breathing room between them.
Yeah, this is sort of partway through the series transition from being a fantasy novel that just had some ideas built off of puns to being nothing but a showcase for long lists of puns, which is what it would eventually become.
Now, the funny thing is, when you look into the author's note, astonishingly few of these actually came from fans. Most of these, they just come from him.
This was much shorter. I should mention that I've talked to you about this, but for the audience, the book Rock and a Hard Place, I am actually in, or rather my puns are in. I'm listed in the back, along with, at this point, pages and pages of people. And I'm under my dead name, so it's not...
So you won't be like, oh, there you are.
Yeah. But it was still kind of cool, even though at that point I was kind of past Xanth.
Now, as I understand it, very little of your original text was changed.
Yeah, almost. There's about a page, which is almost all simply the words that I sent him, with just some sentences interspersed with like the characters reacting to them. So it was very, it was kind of, when I read it, that was one of the things that kind of took some of the shine off, because at one point I was like, oh, this is really cool. It's like, this is like an actual sentence that I wrote, and it's in this book. But then I thought, this guy is like a professional author, and he's just like straight up copying a letter from a 14-year-old, or however old I was. I don't remember when I sent it, because it was a long time between when I sent it and when it was in the book, the publishing industry being what it is.
Did you get like a letter saying, I loved your page of puns and I want to use it?
Yeah, actually I did get a letter from him that said, he said, I've got some puns like that in the next one, but I'll something like, I don't want to put words in his mouth because I don't remember exactly what he said, but he did write me like a personal letter back.
That's very nice of him. He is a very, one of the reasons that he's been able to do a Xanth book every year all our lives is because he is a pathological writer. He just has to keep writing and writing and writing. And it used to be that he would actually send a personal letter back to anyone who sent him a letter. I don't think he can do that anymore. But
I think for all the things that we're probably going to be, well, that you probably will be, and other people will be probably criticizing him for over the course of this podcast, he was very responsive to fans. There's a lot of stories of him. Like some of them were heartwarming. Like I think there was like a kid runaway who ran away to his house just because Piers Anthony was his favorite author, and he sort of went out of his way to get the kid back home safely and make him welcome in the time. And maybe some people he shouldn't have been corresponding with so freely, like convicted pedophiles.
He definitely shouldn't have been doing exactly what he did with you, taking the convicted pedophile's writings and including it in his book.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think any of that happens in the Xanth books, but he does this with other books too.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, I shouldn't have said he shouldn't have been writing to them, because the guy's in jail. It's nice to write him, but don't let him pitch to you.
Yeah, I mean, you need to learn to set boundaries and that kind of thing. And then there's the whole thing going on with Jenny, and we'll have to get into that in a later time.
Yeah, so this is before Jenny, so.
Yeah. Where does Jenny first show up? Is she in she's got to be in the 15th or 16th book?
So I want to. She was definitely in the books that I was reading. I think I remember her being prominent during that. There was a kind of a trilogy where there was kind of the Dolph trilogy, where
Yeah.
the Dolph Electra Nada trilogy, kind of where it's all about this question comes up and gets resolved. And I think she was big around that time.
Yeah, I think she showed up. I think it was Isle of You that she was the first one that she
Yeah,
was in.
yeah. Because I know she wasn't in the early ones, but she was definitely in it before I stopped reading. So before, like, the 18, 19, 20 was where I stopped being less excited for them.
Yeah, most people seem to agree that the jump the shark moment was calling a book The Color of Her Panties.
Yeah, I think so that book and like the next 2 or 3 were kind of like my season 9 of The Simpsons.
Yes, me too.
I was still watching it, but I was starting to realize that I was no longer really excited for a new one. Man, season 9 is too early. It's like season 10 of The Simpsons.
I was going to say season 9 was exactly right, but maybe I just had less. I just had less patience for The Simpsons' downfall than you did.
That is really weird. I'll leave it at that. Just
yeah.
without turning this into a Simpsons podcast,
which we could easily do.
Yeah.
So, anyway, on our story, so we end up with 2 search parties. We have Irene, and Irene teams up with a centaur. Have we met Kem before? Was she in another book?
She's sort of introduced like she's known. I didn't really prepare by reviewing the previous ones before.
No, me neither.
This was me coming back to Xanth after like 20 years.
Well, welcome back.
Yeah. But I know we've met other centaurs, and she might be the daughter of the other centaurs.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure she is. I'm trying to remember if we've seen her, like, in full centaur form as opposed to a filly. Because, this is another thing about Xanth. No matter who, everybody gets paired off eventually. Every single character will eventually get married, including one of the least likely characters that gets introduced in this book.
Who is that?
Fracto.
Oh, I don't think I got that far.
Yes. Okay, one of the major characters who, actually, he's barely a character, more like just kind of a running gag, that there is a mean little cloud who wears a crown who calls himself King Cumulofractonimbus. And he continually makes trouble for the characters in this book, and we see him in multiple books coming since. But eventually, there is a book. It's in the book Yon Ill Wind, which was, I think, the last one that I read. There is a book where a hurricane comes through Xanth, and Fracto gets smit.
Oh, so he's in love with the hurricane.
Yeah. And one thing I like about the hurricane is that she has one eye, but it's such a beautiful eye.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that's that would be interesting to read something from the perspective of a cloud.
Yeah. It's not from his perspective, but it would be. Yeah. I know, that makes it a little less interesting. It's from the perspective of a mundane family that gets lost in Xanth, and they have 3 pets. They have a dog named Woofer, and a bird named Tweeter, and a cat named Midrange.
I just imagine them. I don't know if this is the case, but I imagine them like just driving through the forest in like a wood-paneled sedan.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Actually, I think they're in an RV.
No, okay. Yeah, that probably makes even more sense. But Fracto is probably the biggest jerk in Xanth. He's such a big jerk that we will see a scene in this book where all the characters, including antagonists, come together, and Fracto is pointed out as the one person who doesn't.
Yeah. It's actually pretty funny that he is, so dedicated to being a jerk that he will just, intentionally try to ruin things for everybody, even when everyone's at peace. And it's so weird that one of the most evil people is just a cloud that looks like a bath toy.
Yeah, he's got a very he looks like, you see the picture of the cloud with the puffy cheeks in the corner of a map.
Yeah, you're right. I wonder if that was the inspiration, because I know that Anthony has drawn on those kind of maps before. In one of the books, you see a land whale, and it specifically looks like a medieval drawing of a whale where it has eyes in its side and a pig's face.
I guess you probably have lots of extra space on the edges of the Xanth maps because Here Be Dragons is in the middle. So we kind of get into the chase part now, right? Where
Yes.
it's all we kind of cut back and forth from Ivy and Stanley, the youthened dragon, and Hugo. And I don't know, does Hugo in there from the very beginning? I think he kind of comes in a
Yeah,
little
he
later.
shows up a little later after Ivy gets abandoned by the yak, who has taken her for a long walk as they chat about pun after pun after pun. And then the yak gets hit by one of those forget spells and goes stomping off, wondering where it is. And that's when Ivy meets the Gap Dragon, who has been shrunken down to a baby dragon, just as Humphrey has been shrunk down to a baby. But she immediately sees it and thinks what any kid would think when they saw a baby dragon. How cute! It's a new pet.
The dragon lacked experience and instincts relating to friendly receptions. What was the proper response? Ivy walked up to it fearlessly.
My very own pet dragon, she cried. Green, like Mommy's hair, to be my friend and companion and guard me when I'm afraid.
She reached up to pat the ugly snout.
What a lovely creature!
The dragon was not at all reassured. In fact, it found itself athwart a dilemma. Chase, flee, or fight? None of the signals matched a pattern. No one had ever called it lovely before or patted it on the snout, so it remained stationary, taking no action. A nervous waft of steam puffed from it.
Nice steam,
Ivy said.
You're a steamer, so your name is Stanley.
She had been told tales of strange, funny mundania, where impossible things existed, such as metal machines that traveled on wheels and people who had no magic. She wasn't good at comprehending impossibilities, but she had an apt memory for names.
Stanley Steamer, she repeated. You're wonderful.
Ivy, because she was what she was, a creature of love and innocence and unsuspected power, had in an instant tamed one of the most formidable monsters of Xanth, the Gap Dragon. No one had ever done that before. Some people might have considered it a miracle, but it was not. It was merely an early indication of Ivy's own formidability, which is allied to that of her grandfather Bink.
Yeah, this is where we actually get the title, which is that they describe her putting the dragon on a pedestal, which I think is probably the first time I encountered that phrase.
Yeah, I always wondered what the pedestal meant, and even reading it as an adult, it seems like kind of a clumsy metaphor to use in this context.
Yeah, I don't know if it's even really accurate, but
No.
Irene actually had a sort of premonition that we forgot to say, but that was the book kind of began with a weird dream.
Yeah, she had a weird dream of some sort of nameless horror, and it was between a statue of a dragon and what was the other one?
Was it Ivy between the statue and then something else?
Yeah. And she saw. Oh, it was a statue of Imbri of the Daymare.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, she was the horse that became king in the previous book, and you see her a couple of times, and because she can she's a daymare, which means she brings daydreams, which means that anytime somebody kind of drifts off in thought, Imbri is there watching.
Yeah, which is
And
very,
it seems like that would be a really convenient way to get messages to everyone, but they don't think to do that until the end.
yeah, I think they talk about her having some kind of she's like Uatu the Watcher.
Oh.
She just does not get involved unless it's really serious.
Yeah. So why did she translate for Fracto? I don't get it.
Who knows? Maybe she just does things on a whim sometimes.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
so we have
to
the two parties.
Yeah, I like the idea that to talk, she just makes you think about somebody saying something. But let's see. So I think the first thing they encounter is the witch.
Stanley and Ivy find their way into a huge garden tree, which is called the Coven Tree, and it's this tree that's almost like a city and even has its own landscapes, which is a lot of this stuff just kind of flew by my head as a kid, but now I'm reading it and I'm like, wow, this is a whole book right here. I'm surprised that
this is one of those sections that's just pun after pun until it kind of feels like it's not describing anything solid.
Yeah. But anyway, they get trapped by one of the witch's plants. The witch is a plant grower like Irene, although she doesn't have the power to make them grow fast. And so Ivy gets trapped by something called time.
Yeah,
so
they get essentially frozen.
Yeah, so she and Stanley are frozen in time, and Irene, who has come looking for them, along with Chem. It's not. I keep wanting to say Chem, but no. The zombie specifically called her Chem. So, Chem is there, and Grundy. Yeah, we forgot to mention Grundy. Grundy was my favorite character as a kid.
Oh yeah, Grundy. He's got I feel like he's familiar, but I think he's more of a character type than a character. But there's just this little
big-mouthed guy that everyone kind of hates, but he's on their side.
Yeah, he's a jerk, but he's a jerk to everybody, and also he has he'll do the right thing when it counts.
Yes,
and he's really small, so nobody wants to beat him up.
He's like Oscar the Grouch, yeah. And when you read a Xanth book, you just naturally gravitate to giving him the Gilbert Gottfried voice.
Yeah. I think that fits really well. I think he's still he is still like a doll at this point, isn't he?
We're told that he's made of flesh.
So maybe he's like a homunculus.
Yeah, he's a person, just very small. But he started out as like a doll that good magician Humphrey had created to translate for him. I guess he can make golems. And in that second book, he was serving he was doing the year's sentence because he wanted to know how he could become real, and the answer was simply care. And Bink says to him, that's it? You're doing a year's service for one word? And the golem was like, what, did you think you had a monopoly on stupidity?
That's one word, but it's actually it's not cryptic. I mean, you kind of get what's being said.
Yeah, it's not cryptic, but at the same time, that's a very difficult thing to learn to apply. If you don't know how to care in the first place, it's very difficult to where do you go to work out at caring?
I don't care a lot. Stand by that big meter and try different things until it goes up.
Well, without brains is more like it.
Yeah.
So Grundy is there, so and Grundy's talent, now that it used to be just what he was, because golems in Xanth are not like, they're not like your Jewish golem. They are basically talents without a person.
Yeah, and his thing is that he can translate anything.
Yeah, and not just so he and Dor tend to work together a lot because Grundy can talk to anybody and Dor can talk to anything. And Irene is not a big fan of Grundy. Most people aren't, because he's kind of got that hey hot lips kind of attitude toward women a lot of the time. Yeah. But
I guess we should address something that is all over this book.
Yes.
It's just very sexual in a very unpleasant way. They're constantly bringing up Irene feeling like she's just this old has-been hag because she's 28 years old. They're constantly talking about her underwear. everything in the entire book is really, really gendered in a weird way.
Yeah.
When they go to the mountain, you have the snake and the maenads, and they describe them specifically as like these imposing male and female forces. You'll have things will just like they'll bring up like gender constantly, even when it has nothing to do with what they're talking about. It's just this very intrusive thing, even when you're
Yeah,
trying to
it is. And it's, I don't meet a lot of people who were Xanth fans who have gender normative attitudes today. So I wonder if Xanth was kind of a shock to their system, like it was for me and maybe you.
Maybe, yeah. As far as I can remember when I was a kid, and this is trying to remember my opinions from decades ago, so it's tough. But I think I just kind of read this as the way things were because that was so prevalent back then. I mean, you saw it everywhere. It's just that in Xanth, it's very, very blunt.
They're not subtle about it at all, and certain things just come across as really weird that they would be said not by a person but in the text written by the narrator.
Yeah, which is I think makes it more bothersome than it would be, because if it was just Irene thinking about like worrying about getting old, it's like, yeah, everybody worries about that, even when you're at an age that I would still consider to be really young, especially if you've had a kid. But it's the fact that the narrator seems to kind of agree that, oh yeah, like the bloom of youth has fled. Get out the bathrobe, Granny.
Here's a passage just from the second chapter. Her husband looked at her with a certain familiar resignation. He knew she would do things her own way, regardless of his preference, so he didn't set himself up for embarrassment by opposing her openly. It did not seem to occur to him that her way was best. Men were not very practical in some respects.
Yeah, it's that's another example of how they're basically gendering everything. If Dor does something, it's not because it's what Dor would do; it's what a man would do.
Yeah, that really bothered me as a kid, and it really bothered me as an adult. When my girlfriend would say "just like a man," I would be like, "But no, just like me."
Yeah, you're not a very usual man.
No, I'm not. I'm one of those people who are just like, somebody said that it was, the kind of ADHD that makes you forget your gender if you're not looking at it.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, I think. If we kept talking about gender and sex issues in Xanth, this would be a 10-hour episode.
That's true. So
I'm trying to think what happens next in the thing. We were introduced both to the witch and to her son.
Yes,
her son.
Her son is interesting. I like him.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy. He's this. I can't remember his name though.
Xavier.
Xavier.
Yeah, Xavier, and he has a pet hippogriff named Zap. X-A-P.
Yeah, this gets confusing because his pet hippogriff is named Zap. His power is the Zap, which is he can like blast you with basically like lightning or something, and you drop dead.
Yeah, he has a sort of mega buster built into his finger, and he doesn't use it for much, but we do see him save Kem from a cobra lily that's about to bite her.
Yeah, and you know what? You know who he reminds me of? Someone we just talked about in another podcast. Reminds me of Gordon from the Addams Family. He's basically a good person who was raised by a very bad person, and it's kind of given him weird competing loyalties and values.
Mm-hmm. So so how did he team up with? That's right. The witch has Ivy in her power, and she wants Irene to marry her son, and Irene, who has thoughtfully not brought up the fact that she's queen, is like, I can't do that. I'm spoken for, and Xavier isn't very interested in it either. He just wants to go flying, and so the witch's name is Xanthip, by the way, which is apparently some obscure plant pun. And Xanthip is saying, well, if you won't, there's something else I would trade your daughters for. Bring me the seeds of doubt, dissension, and war.
Yeah, I'm not sure what he's going to do with them, but I mean,
Yeah.
I assumed up to no good.
Yeah, this, as a kid, I thought these were some sort of, legendary mythical thing, but no, it's more puns. The seed of doubt, the seed of dissension, the seed of war.
I don't think I got that even on my last read through, that they were supposed to be puns.
I've definitely heard the phrase the seed of doubt and seed of dissension, and something, you might hear the phrase seeds of war if you were watching like a Hitler documentary or something.
Yeah, makes sense.
So she does not. And the way to get those is to go to Mount Parnassus, where the Simurgh has them. Now, the Simurgh, this is another one of those things that's really, you could handle it a lot better, because the Simurgh is not just a mythical creature. It's part of a living religion.
Yeah, which religion is this?
A benevolent mythical bird that is still regarded. Yes, it's mentioned in Sufi poetry, the Shahnameh, and in Kurdish folklore, and
so this is kind of like random cultural appropriation.
Yeah, pretty much. It's almost like when you use the native monster whose name begins with W. You're not actually supposed to say.
Oh yeah, I've heard about that. So this is not really cool, but also it stands out a lot less when compared to other fantasy novels than some of the other issues with Xanth does. Because this is a very common thing in novels and video games and basically everything. But maybe it's that the lesson is make up your own monsters.
Yeah, it really is. I gotta say, when I was a kid and I was flipping through the monster manual, I was a lot more attracted to things like the Otiug and the Zorn than, unicorns and ogres.
Next time, the conclusion of Dragon on a Pedestal, where we'll visit the Little Athens neighborhood of Xanth, discuss how loaded the word dusky can be, and watch in horror as a plot device that could sustain its own book series is casually forgotten. It's all next week on Biopsy of an Ogre.
Sweetums, get that froggy now. Froggy will be Sweetums chow. Sweetums, get that frog and how. Polly Wally Froggy, get a mighty pow.
He seems to be asleep. Shall we go?
After you.